Now let's look at other stories being discussed across the media today. So we start with The Telegraph, which leads with Brexit, the increasing acrimony being felt at the most senior levels in the Conservative Party. Pro-Brexit party members have accused the government of selling out over the EU divorce bill. The New York Times, their international edition, saying it's good news for the world's economy with a wave of growth that's creating jobs, lifting fortunes and tempering fears of popular discontent. The Guardian carries a warning for workers in the north of England by explaining they are at the highest risk of having their jobs taken by machines when 1 in 4 jobs are replaced by advances in technology. ABC News, their website, says Strava, the fitness tracking app, is revealing potentially sensitive information about military bases and supply routes via its global heat map website. That's a story we've got as well. And then finally, his picture is on the front page of the Financial Times. I promised you more information about the IKEA founder and Swedish multi-billionaire Ingvar Kamprad, who died at the age of 91. So, Oliver Cornock is back, Editor-in-Chief of Oxford Business Group. Thanks for returning. We are very welcome after our Brussels experience. So let's talk about the Daily Telegraph. Minister Brexiteers opposed to EU bill are swivel-eyed. That's the headline. It's getting very difficult, isn't it, within number 10?
Clearly, and we swivel between hard Brexit, soft Brexit and the other names that we've given all of this. And the simple fact is that Theresa May is quite weak. But at the same time, to me, it always seems that why would you reveal your position fully anywhere in a negotiation? The problem is because she's quite enfeebled after last summer's election, which was a bit of a disaster, a narrow victory. Everybody who's got an opinion will blame her. She's enfeebled and weakened. At the same time, there's nobody else in the ranks coming up. The Tories will be very concerned about a leadership election. They have to be, because Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party in the UK is sort of in parity in the polls at the moment. So it's a very tricky one. I think looking beyond that, though, where we discussed earlier, we need a clear, investors, business, everybody wants a clear position. And the fact that she's not made any significant statements on this since the Lancaster House speech does cause some concern. In
the meantime, you've got the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, making quite a few comments. He was in Davos last week as well, and it was his comments about, how close things might be with what we have currently with the European Union that's really riled those within the party. I mean, it was kind of fuel to the fire, wasn't it, in a way?
And it's an incendiary position for those hard Brexiteers within the Cabinet and within, indeed, the wider Conservative Party, for Philip Hammond. And, of course, in the UK, in Britain, it's always been very difficult when a Chancellor is at loggerheads with the Prime Minister. That doesn't bode well for policy making.
So how do you think this is all going to play out? I mean, as we've already said today, we're going to be hearing more from Brussels' position and what they feel should be the sort of scope of the transition agreement if we have one. But this is the problem, isn't it? There's just so much uncertainty, and while that is there, the UK economy, UK businesses are going to be really losing out in some ways.
That, of course, is the multi-billion euro question, isn't it? Exactly what's going to happen at the end. And I go back to where I started. I don't think anybody quite knows. And the simple fact is, in a negotiation, you start out with an end point in sight and you compromise. And people would do well to remember that. I'm not a defender of anybody involved in this, but it is a compromise and will have to be so.
Well, hopefully we will get the voice from Brussels. It'd be very interesting to get that side and their thinking during this process, so we will persevere with that. But in the meantime, let's move on. The New York Times, global wave of growth reverses a long slope, but the recovery's pace is slow, it says, and geopolitical risks make it vulnerable. This was the ongoing kind of story of last week during the World Economic Forum. This IMF report saying the global economy is in a very strong position right now, this year and next year. Others as well coming in through with that, World Bank reports, etc. Your thoughts on where we are?
Well, it's certainly something that we at Oxford Business Group are hearing about, the emerging markets. There's certainly growth emerging there, to coin a phrase. And of course, some of those areas like Africa are seeing higher than average growth. So 3.1% is the IMF's prediction for 2018. Modest growth. You mentioned quite rightly, of course, it's a steady growth. Now, on some levels, steady growth's better because, of course, steady growth means less chance of a big drop. That's what we're trying to get to. More broadly, though, there's a concern too, I fear, that there's a short-term growth and uptick. Tax cuts in the US, big news, and of course quantitative easing in the European Union. There's been some very easy growth, easy monetary policy going on. So that's a concern because once that tapers off, what impact will that have on the global economy?
Can I just ask you as well, because I'm not as across the Middle East and say, for example, Saudi Arabia, and I know it's your area of specialism. We were looking at oil just now, Brent crude above $70 a barrel. I mean, that does bode well, doesn't it, for Saudi Arabia, for Russia? But also I'm just wondering about, the shale producers in the US. I mean, they'll be stepping up a gear now that the oil's climbing in value. We
have that increasingly common sort of new paradigm, which is that there is a sweet spot, as you mentioned, a perfect position really for the price of crude oil, because when the US shale exporters are able to the point of viability is quite high. So $60 to $70 a barrel is considered by a lot of people widely, and certainly that was the case in Davos, wasn't it? That was the sweet spot. I don't think we're going to be heading back to those post $100 a barrel, unless, of course, there's some big geopolitical tensions that come to the fore. And, of course, that's never far away. And, of course, the Middle East, as we know, is a hotspot.
It is, absolutely. Let's look at this other story, which, again, another discussion point last week, this issue of automation and jobs being replaced. And this article in The Guardian looks at the fact that in the UK, in the United Kingdom, the north-south divide could get even wider because actually quite a few jobs in the north could be replaced by machines. It
interested me in a number of angles. We've heard so much about disruption. We've heard so much about the need for e-commerce, fulfillment, logistics, all of these things which are quite heavy manual jobs. At the same time, automation and robots are changing that. But more broadly, the education that goes into people being able to operate these programs that are behind the robots. It's just a very worrying narrative for everybody in the UK because it's so common, this north-south thing, and equitable spread of wealth. That would have been a big topic at Davos, and I'm ashamed it didn't come up.
But it was unfortunately, what came out of Davos in terms of what the media reporting on was dominated by, you can guess,
Brexit.
Donald Trump's presence at Davos. So unfortunately, some of the other big conversations that were going on there weren't reported very widely because the US president arrived and spoke. So let's look at ABC News now. This is amusing, but also quite worrying. The unintended consequences of getting fit in the military. Strava publishing details about their secret military bases without them really realising it.
And I love the fact that it's these heat maps, so the fact that all of these military personnel, very fit and very healthy fighting forces,
they're
lapping, and of course the heat is getting stronger, so it's very easy to identify where these bases are. The other great thing, of course, this was identified by a student, an Australian student, young chap, so with all these intelligence bodies around the world, and a student spots that. I love that.
It's quite funny, isn't it? But at the same time, it just goes to show the risk of all these devices we're wearing and just the information it's putting out there to whoever wants it. Indeed, wearable tech and the unintended consequences. Now, are you an IKEA fan? Have you built lots of this stuff and lost bits and gone bonkers and been very frustrated, like many of us?
I think very frustrated. I think everybody's had a row over a flat pack assembly. The simple fact is that IKEA has changed modern life in lots of ways. When I travel to the Middle East, I do frequently. There's an IKEA in Riyadh. There's a new IKEA coming in Bahrain, in Manama. This is ubiquitous, and what a success story. What struck me reading the obituary in the Financial Times was that this chap, extremely wealthy, one of the wealthiest people in the world, was incredibly frugal. He sort of kept his coupons, drove a clapped-out Volvo, always flew economy class.
So where's it all going then? This 91-year-old's money. Ingvar Kamprad, we must name him, the founder of IKEA.
Absolutely.
We just wonder what the will is like. If he was that frugal.
Yes, exactly. We don't find out. Indeed, the Financial Times doesn't talk about his legacy in terms of finance at all.
But it's interesting. I mean, IKEA seems to be, as you say, just growing and growing in terms of its global reach. In many, many countries around the world, people are having to grapple with the Billy bookshelf.
Absolutely. And also people are moving away and moving into smaller spaces. They're moving into more modern places. It fits very well. It's very inexpensive. And dare I say, the downside, of course, it's quite disposable. That's one challenge that we haven't really covered. Everyone's chucking things out a lot more.
I just wonder how sustainable it is as well. It's quite funny because my producer was just telling me in my ear that someone who does for a living assembling these things for people, because that's a whole other work. He's sort of saying he's replacing marriage guidance counsellors. All right, thank you, Oliver, for coming in. We really do appreciate it. That is the briefing this morning. Thank you too for your comments.